Here we are in week 3 of our Villians Series. In this series, we've been looking at some of the famous villains of the Bible and seeking to learn from their mistakes. So far, we've talked about Lucifer, who's better known as Satan, and Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, who thought he was a cow. And if you weren't there, it's a long story. You can check it out in our last video. Today, though, we're going to be taking a different approach. Instead of talking about a specific villain, we're going to talk about a group of people in the New Testament that's painted as villains, the Pharisees. Now, to get us ready in the mindset of this, I have to ask you a question. Have you ever been 100% right and 100% wrong all at the same time? Now, when I was younger, there was a time where I was invited to a birthday party of one of my friends. And when I came home from that birthday party, I remember going up and talking to my mom, and I told her, "Mom, that family they weren't Christians." My mom asked me why. And I told her, "They don't have any Bibles in their house." And my mom was like, "Where did you look?" And I was like, "I looked everywhere." Now my mom was embarrassed because she thought I was going all over this house looking everywhere to see if this family had Bibles. Now, for me in this story, I was right in the fact that having a Bible is important to Christians. However, I was wrong as well because I didn't know what their faith life looked like. And I didn't actually look everywhere. I just assumed. Now today we're going to be talking about a group of people who were 100% right and 100% wrong at the same time. They are our villains for tonight. And again, these people were the Pharisees. Now many of us have heard about the Pharisees. They were the incredibly religious people during the time of Jesus. So who were the Pharisees? Well, to start, look at the word Pharisee. In the original language, the word Pharisee comes from the word for separate. This is what they were all about. They wanted to be separate from the general population because they considered the general population to be a bunch of sinners. In fact, they believed the reason Israel was under Roman rule was because of the sin of the people. Interestingly, the word for holy in the Bible means roughly the same thing, separate. It's this idea of being set apart and not participating in what is sinful. You see, the Pharisees believed they could fix Israel with holiness. They believed the answer to the world's problems was to follow God's law perfectly. And they went at it 100%. They were incredibly devoted. They did their best to follow all the laws. They were so intense about it that they created more laws to keep them away from violating the actual laws. If nothing else, you have to admire the devotion and holiness of the Pharisees. They really were separate. And yet, if the Pharisees were so holy, why was Jesus so against them? Jesus absolutely condemned them. Listen to these words of Jesus from Matthew 23. "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You shut the door of the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. You yourselves do not enter, nor will you let those enter who are trying to. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You travel over land and sea to win a single convert. When you have succeeded, you make them twice as much a child of hell as you are." I don't know about you, but I get the sense that Jesus isn't a fan. So what's the deal? How could the Pharisees be so right and be so wrong at the same time? That's what this lesson is all about today. We're going to explore 3 stories about the Pharisees and uncover what they were missing. There's so much tension in the gospel stories. You really have to read them. I want you to take a look at a tension-filled moment from Luke 18. Jesus is telling a story about the Pharisees. Now try to imagine how it felt to be a Pharisee in the crowd as we read this first story. To some who were confident of their righteousness and looked down on everyone else, Jesus told this parable. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed, "God, I thank you that I am not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and give 1/10 of all I get." But the tax collector stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his breast and said, "God, have mercy on me, a sinner." I tell you that this man, rather than the other, went home justified before God. For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. Ouch. I imagine the Pharisees in the crowd grinding their teeth and balling their fists in furious anger. It was stories like this that led the Pharisees to plot against Jesus and eventually kill him. So what's going on here? Well, like we said, the Pharisees were incredibly holy. They followed all the rules, but here's the thing. They were 100% right in their focus on personal holiness and 100% wrong for thinking they didn't need grace. They had forgotten their own brokenness and sin. Their hearts weren't soft toward God. They weren't grateful. They believed their rule following won them favor with God. But that's not how it works. Now, it's important that we understand we are all broken. We are all messed up. We all make mistakes, big and small. We've all contributed to the mess that is our world today. And yet God gives us grace in Jesus. At the cross, he rescued us and restored us to himself, which is what we just celebrated this past weekend. God wants us to be holy, but trying to be holy can't win God's favor. God gives us his favor in the form of grace, Jesus on a cross. Now the Pharisees, again, were 100% right about their focus on personal holiness and 100% wrong in their thinking that they didn't need grace. So don't be a Pharisee. A prayer for you this week is, God, help me to remember my brokenness today, and thank you for your grace. The next story I want to share with you is from the Gospel of John, chapter 8. Now I have to warn you, this story is intense, awkward, and pretty scandalous. You might need to turn off your imagination. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law of Moses commands us to stone such women. Now what do you say?" They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, "Let anyone who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. Now, what was he writing in the dirt? Now, no one knows for sure. Some have argued that he was writing the secret sins of the accusers. Another thought is he was writing down the names of all those who were present. But the story continues. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." This story is incredible. Like I said at the beginning, the Pharisees blamed the problems Israel was experiencing on the sinful common people. In their minds, it was people like this sinful woman who were keeping Israel enslaved to the hated Romans. Following the letter of the law, they were ready to end her life. But Jesus stood in their way. At the end of whatever he wrote in the dirt, every single accuser walks away. And listen to these beautiful words again. "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." This woman is the most vulnerable, awkward, and is in the most shameful position, and Jesus speaks with such gentleness and love. Now, these words fill me with such gratitude and hope. Listen, above all else, God is love. His heart is kind and forgiving. Even at your absolute worst and dirtiest, God is there with love in his eyes. Has no one condemned you? Some of us need to hear these words today. What is it that the Pharisees have missed here? Let's be clear, they were 100% right about God's standard. Adultery is out of bounds. It is sin. But what they missed was God's heart. They missed the compassionate heart of the Father. They wanted to condemn, but God wants to restore. They wanted to kill, but God wanted to heal. The Pharisees were 100% right about God's standard and 100% wrong about God's heart. Don't be a Pharisee. A prayer for you this week, again, God, help me speak and act with love. Help me to reflect your heart to the people I interact with this week. The last thing that the Pharisees missed doesn't come from a specific story from the Gospels, but rather the Gospels as a whole. You see, the Pharisees were hyper-focused on holiness and also hyper-focused on the coming Messiah. And like most Jews of the age, they were waiting for God's Messiah to deliver them from their oppressors. And here's the thing, they missed him. They completely missed him. And worse, they rejected him and killed him. If I could sum up what it means to be a Pharisee in one sentence, I would say this. It's possible to be 100% right and completely miss God and what he is doing in the world. You can't be the most religious person in the world and completely miss out on a relationship with Jesus. This is a very important lesson for us to understand. Here are some things and some questions to think about. What is God doing around you? What is he doing in your family, in your school? What is God up to? Are you paying attention? Now, the Pharisees completely missed Jesus. It's unbelievable if you think about it, but sometimes I think we are just as guilty in not paying attention to how God is moving around us. The Pharisees were the most religiously devoted and holy people of their time. It's kind of unbelievable to think that they were villains. But why are they villains? Because they missed their brokenness and missed God's heart and missed God. The bottom line for tonight is this. It's possible to be incredibly religious and completely miss God in his heart. So don't be a Pharisee here. There's some warnings for all of us with this story. Let's not become the Pharisees ourselves. This week, let's remember a few things. First, we are broken, but God meets us with grace. We are living in a culture of sin, but God's culture is to restore and heal, not condemn. And lastly, it's all about a relationship with Jesus.